class hour to begin. Oh, is this thing gonna? Who's got the handheld microphone? That'd be my brother Steve. So if you have questions or comments, we'll send him your way so everybody can hear that and participate. Um, we're going to open with a brief prayer from the hymnal. Lord Jesus, and waits for thy salvation. Built on this rock secure, thy church shall endure, e'en though the world decay and all things pass away. O hear us, Jesus. So, to introduce our subject, we've just concluded our series on the Psalms, which was going on throughout the fall and early winter. Beginning next week, we're going to switch gears. Sometimes we have Bible class with whichever pastor is there for doing the services, has the class. Some series. Steve, can you get a different one to use otherwise? I am just going to use this one because this has been cutting in and out. I don't know if it's this headset or what. Anyway, we've got an in-between portion here before Pastor Tiefel's series starts. And since next week, our voters are going to be considering um, our CBP estimate for the coming year, and we'll explain what that all means. It has to do with the support for the work that we do together as a church body with all the other CLC congregations. We've got plenty on our plate that we're doing with church and school here, but we're part of a wider fellowship. So, to coin a phrase from a certain sermon just recently, we're going to step back and look at the church. Not the Holy Christian Church, that God's building, but our particular church body, the CLC, and see what the Lord is doing with the support that we provide for it. We start out with a little review of history. Hey, we're a couple years late in celebrating our 60th anniversary due to COVID, but that's coming up this summer. But it coincides with the history of our church body. So in 1962, the original church is built, and this is probably in the mid 70s or so. It's the church I remember from when I was going to high school here with the expanded school. And there was more expansion when this fellowship hall was built, and then about 15 years ago, our new sanctuary. And now it looks more like this, where the roof of that center roof is not quite complete, so that has been done. That's what we look like today. And with all the things that are happening day in, day out, year in, year out with Messiah Lutheran Church, that's running parallel with the history of our church body, the Church of the Lutheran Confession, which began in 1960. And here's a look at what the convention delegates looked like, I believe, in 1963 or 4 in Marquette, Michigan. And a few years ago, this is what our convention delegates looked like on the grass outside the field house. Where have we been and where have we gone as a church body? Started out with upwards of right around 9,000 members. Today we're at 7,000 members. Somewhat of a decline in overall membership. Although the people with whom we're in fellowship is in the many tens of thousands, and we'll talk about that in our overseas missions. This last summer, we had our convention in 2021, which was delayed for a year. We're going to have back-to-back conventions for the first time, I believe, since ever. Just incidentally, the reason is the convention's supposed to be in the even-numbered years. In our Constitution, we couldn't have it in 2020, so we had it in 2021. We're not going to change our Constitution so that it says we have convention in the odd-numbered years, so we have 2 in a row. So this year we're back on the even-numbered years as we meet together. And behind the scenes, as far as our larger church body goes, we've got people in charge of the education department at Emmanuel Lutheran College in particular. With our missions here in the United States and overseas, that's our Board of Missions. There are 4 men on each of these boards. People who handle the money, the Board of Trustees, and the people who handle the publications like the spokesman of the Journal of Theology and other things, that's the Board of Education and Publication. So, how things happen in our larger church body is you've got men who are in charge of these different categories of things that we do as a synod. They get together, well, the boards get together more often, but everybody gets together, the leadership on these boards, twice a year to make their plans for what's going to happen at ILC, what's going to happen overseas, what's going to happen with investments. And then they all get representatives together in what's called the coordinating council, and they sort of arrange things to work together at that twice a year coordinating council meeting. But it all receives some direction, and major decisions are made in the summertime when our delegates come to the semi-annual convention. It's semi-annual or biannual is twice a year. Semi-annual is every other year. Am I right? I always say the wrong thing, and my wife tells me what's right, but she's not here. She was here last night. Oh, I don't mind telling you, among our president, vice president, secretary, and moderator, and the people who are working on the boards, nobody gets paid for that work. CLC salaries that are paid by CLC are to fund those who staff our administration and bookhouse. That's all. Everybody else is working with a labor of love for our kingdom efforts together. And it's a labor of love on the part of the congregations whom they serve. We've got laymen who are on the boards, but among the pastors and teachers who serve, the congregations allow them the time to dedicate. And it's a lot of work to see to these efforts that we do together. I'm not certain this map is 100% accurate, so don't. There's no need to correct me on a given green push pin, but this is a pretty good visual representation from not too long ago about where all the CLC congregations are in the lower 48 and to there in Alberta, Canada. 66 congregations served by 57 pastors. That means there are certain pastors who serve more than one congregation. For instance, Pastor Chad Seabit, who serves Fairchild and Millston and Onalaska and Melrose. He's got a quad parish. Now, there are others who serve a double parish, in some cases a tri-parish. And as some of our smaller congregations become older and can't support a single pastor by themselves, they become a joint calling effort with other congregations served by one pastor. It's probably also appropriate to mention at this time that we have a whole raft of pastors who are at or beyond retirement age, and there's going to be a mass exodus, either with the Lord calling some home, or we finally wear them out and they actually do retire. I'm not going to talk about anybody in particular because I hope he'll stick around for quite a few years yet, but I think you know who I'm talking about. We have 3 young men in the entire seminary. There's 3 years of seminary. There are 3 men. We had 1 graduate last year. We have 1 graduate this coming year. So we're going to be facing a crisis of empty pulpits. It seems that in the past, when we faced that, the Lord's delivered every time. I expect him to one way or the other now as well. As I said before, about 7,000 members, 19 Christian day schools, 2 high schools, that is ILC here in Eau Claire, and Emmanuel High School in Mankato, Minnesota, 1 college and seminary here in Eau Claire. As an outward organization, the CLC is a drop in the religious bucket. This is tiny to have this many congregations and pastors and members. It's a different Bible class to discuss why we are independent from various other Lutheran churches. It's for doctrinal reasons. So we don't enjoy being tiny for its own sake. There are some advantages to having a close-knit group of people in your fellowship. How do we support this joint work that we do? Well, it's through what's called our CBP offerings, the CLC budget, and CBP stands for the Cooperative Budget Plan. So just to tell you how, remember those guys in the boards and the coordinating council and so forth? They meet twice a year, and they've got a plan ahead for what they're going to have to spend, for instance, in the mission board. How much can we support Nepal and Myanmar and the 2 groups in India and the African affiliates because they need our help for what we do over there? How much money do we have available? Well, they get together in the fall and they say, what do we need in order to do this job right? All the boards do that. And then they wait until January and they let everybody know what the needs are. They wait until January when all the churches have their annual meetings and say, we believe we're going to be able to give this much this year. And then they come back in the spring and say, how much do we have to cut from our budget that we thought we were going to need? That's very often what happens. So in our congregation, if you use the envelope system, you have the opportunity to divide up the total of your weekly offering from the left-hand side, the Messiah side, or the CLC side, and various items there. If you happen to put a check in an envelope and you don't write anything on the front, 75% of the amount of that check will go to Messiah home offerings and 25% to our synod efforts. Although you can divide it up any way you like. If you give electronically by e-give, you can inform our financial secretary exactly how you'd like that divided. If it's an e-give, it is not divided, it's 75-25. Okay? Out of any dollar that we contribute toward the Church of the Lutheran Confession's work in their general fund, this is generally how it's split up. Our efforts at Emmanuel Lutheran College goes to the work of the Board of Regents at 59 cents, the Board of Missions at 34 cents, the Board of Trustees at 6 cents, and the Board of Education and Publication at 1 penny. We're going to be looking at the work of each of these aspects of our church body one at a time. And by the way, I want to be careful that the emphasis, we're going to see this dollar bill a lot, but not because I want the emphasis to be on dollars and cents. It's really on the spiritual goals that God is accomplishing through our efforts. So first, let's turn our attention to what has been happening and what is now happening at our high school, college, and seminary, Emmanuel Lutheran College. That's the Board of Regents in charge of that endeavor. Oh, I hope we all are familiar with these images of historic Ingram Hall and the new academic center. This is a really fine drone picture that shows the layout of the whole campus with current field house and commons, the boys' dorm, the academic center, Ingram Hall, and so forth. It's good once in a while to stand back and say, I tell you what, that whole campus with the existing buildings in about 1962, 63 for $85,000 is the Lord saying, oh, here, CLC, here's a present for what you absolutely need at a bargain rate price. And it has been right along. We've got a little chart of current enrollment for this year that was put together by the Board of Regents for their report at their coordinating council meeting this last fall. And it shows, and I might be in the way of the people at home being able to see what's actually on here. And it shows that right now, the high school enrollment is 101 students. College enrollment is 16. That's small, but it's an uptick from last year. And as mentioned, 3 seminary students throughout the 3-year course of seminary. Somebody asked last night how the high school enrollment compares with sort of a trend in recent years. And it's just speaking from memory. I remember over the course of some years ago, we were in the 120s possibly, 120s as much as 130. And the enrollment took a hit as our own Messiah school enrollment did with COVID. And the phenomenon at Messiah School was certain parents who did not want to risk their children being exposed to the virus, and other parents who did not want their children to have to wear a mask when that was required. And I'm just suspecting that some of that same factor was in play with a dip in enrollment at Emmanuel. And as you can see, there's a small bounce back. We're expecting a bounce back in enrollment here at Messiah School, and I hope that continues there at Emmanuel as well. In the college, of great interest to us is the people, the young men and women who will be preparing for the public ministry. So the Bachelor of Science degree, I didn't pause to figure this out beforehand. Which of these guys are in the pre-thee program? The Bachelor of Science? The Bachelor of Science, which is this column, 9 young men in the college department prepare. Those are the teachers. Bachelor of Science is the teachers. 9, 7. That's the right number. Am I right? The, the BA, the BAs are the pre-fee. Still a good number. 8. We're happy about 8 young men preparing in college to enter the seminary. It's the last column? That's not enough. You can add 1 to that number because a recent enrollment is Rene Orozco. Do you know about Rene Orozco, or have you met Rene? He is recently left full-time active duty in the Air Force. He spent some time as a member of our congregation in West Columbia, South Carolina. He's here and entered the college department in preparation to enter the seminary. He has a Lutheran background previously with the Missouri Synod and was unsatisfied with their doctrinal position and found us. He's a really well-spoken, friendly man. His parents happen to be from Mexico. So if you have a chance to say hello to Rene and welcome him to Eau Claire, please be sure to do that. New personnel this year at Emmanuel, Professor David Schaller. There he is. Kelly Beekman retired from her position as the art teacher, and Marcy Gergel is now fulfilling that role. We have new dorm parents, Paul and Courtney Agenton. And a rather new position on campus is that of male and female mentor. That is, students who have personal concerns or problems but don't want to approach people in authority necessarily can find a listening ear. And I believe that Steve Sitto and now April Sitto are filling that role for the young men and women on campus.
Hey, Pastor, would you go back to that last slide real quick?
Yes.
For those of you wishing to wax nostalgic, notice that graphic at the top that also was carefully laid out to show some of the old buildings in the shadow.
See the old Sem house there? Northwest Hall? Oh, that's Northwest Hall. That would be the cottage. And, oh, look at that. That's got to be Messiah, isn't it? That's Rhyme Hall, sorry. It's the same profile. Well, that would be a nice nod to us, but they didn't include us in that graphic. Yeah, so the buildings that have been torn down to make way for the new building projects are up there. Here's our faculty, and for those who are present, who are members of our Emmanuel faculty, you might want to block your ears because I'm going to sing your praises for a minute, because this is an institution of higher learning, and these people who are called full-time to serve us and the students in their charge do so at a ridiculously modest salary, and the class hours they are called upon to teach are unreasonable by secular standards, and they are also expected to fulfill various extracurricular, administrative, or athletic functions or other duties, which they do with no complaints that I've heard. And there's also this factor that when you have a local congregational pastor or teacher, they've got a membership that's backing them up in non-monetary ways. You get a lot of different kinds of support from church members when you're the pastor or the teacher of a local congregation. But there's a lot of them. So they don't really have that localized support. So I think we owe a debt of gratitude to God for the selfless service of these faculty members and part-time teachers. This is probably my favorite slide in the whole set because it's really true. The future of the CLC. This is 5 or 6 years old. This picture of the student body there at the entrance to the academic center, and a graduating class from that same year. The older I get, the more I feel the pull towards stage left when I'm almost 60 years old, and it's not going to be that many years till I'm done. And when you're a young man, you think, oh, the old folks, they'll always be around steering things. And then you get old enough and you say, well, now it's going to be up to us to steer things. And pretty soon we won't be here. Who's going to steer this ship? It's going to be these people. So our 59 cents out of every dollar contributed toward the CBP going to support Emmanuel College seems pretty steep. And it's a lot of money. It's a bargain for what we get. because the well-informed lay people who are going to be salt and light out in their workplace, whatever their vocation is well worth the investment. And those few who take up the challenge to serve the Lord in the public ministry, each one for that lifetime of service, you just can't put a price tag on it. So that's where our church body is going right there. A little bit off our subject, but expansion plans at Emmanuel, it's interesting to me, and there might be a few details about which you weren't aware, that I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years ago, a very generous CLC member who passed away had left a large part of his estate for Emmanuel building projects. It paid off about $1 million in debt on our current academic center, with about $1 million left after that. So there's a long-term expansion committee, and they got right to work, because the next thing that we, as a church body, have decided we need is something to replace the antiquated too small field house. Here's what it might look like. And this is the plans that came before our church body at convention this last summer. You see the current field house and the commons. This is the boys' dorm, and so you drive in to get down to the current field house. Well, on this hillside is where the new athletic facility would be, with new parking. And it would look something like this, with 2 levels, a mezzanine level, and the floor, which has a court going lengthwise, and also able to split into 2 courts for practice, which we can't do now. And by the way, the ceilings in this new building are high enough so that visiting volleyball teams won't be bouncing the volleyball off the ceiling regularly and have our young men chant, ceiling, 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 because it's to our advantage. But it's really a little embarrassing. So if this had been approved last summer, then the plan was for construction to begin this summer. The year 2022, it wasn't approved this last summer. It was kind of put off to be decided at this next convention. And here's how it went down. The proposal that they had was to take our $1 million balance in the building fund from that bequest, add in potentially selling certain property that's across Lowe's Creek that's unused. It would be difficult for the college to use. I have my doubts as to whether the church body wants to sell any part of that property, but that's part of their proposal. Additional contributions and interest from the existing building fund balance, $750,000. This is the trustees, I think, who are agreed in concept with this idea of our church extension fund contributing $2 million towards the project. Over many years, we've had a fund that congregations can borrow from, the church extension fund, at low interest. Our current building expansion progress is just now into the church extension fund for 1.1 million for additional debt we borrowed for that. It's been doing so well and on loan paybacks and accruing interest that they feel they can afford to contribute this amount if the church body chooses to do that, as well as providing an interest-free $2.5 million 30-year loan for a total of price tag of $6.5 million. And they figure that if that was all in place, the monthly mortgage that the CLC would be in for would be about $7,000, and the current mortgage has been about $8,000 for the ILC Academic Center. Yes, sir.
Possibility from the building that was a possibility from the building committee that was not signed off on by the trustees.
You're on the building committee.
And the trustees.
And the trustees. You would know. It's all tentative, in other words. Okay. The way here's what happened. The convention action was to instruct the committee to complete design for renovation of the existing field house as a chapel, and then bring a report to the 2022 convention. And I'll just give you an overview of how the discussion went. Yes, we need a new athletic facility. What about a dedicated building for worship, for chapel on the campus? And there were some who were of the pretty strong opinion that if we place a $6.5 million building ahead of a dedicated worship space, that's kind of misplaced priorities. So the committee wasn't asked to give a detailed plan to take the field house and how they would renovate it and make it a really nice dedicated space for worship. So the convention, with all this discussion, said, we'd like to know exactly how you're going to do that before we sign off on the whole plan. That's why we're picking it up again this summer. That's the long and short of the story. So, yes. Right now, we're debt-free and $1 million to the plus in our building fund. And that would go toward this new project. So, hang on a second.
I thought I remembered too the thought that the field house could be potentially set up for a chapel as well as a theater.
Yeah, it could be multi-purpose uses for the current field house. That's concluding the portion about Emmanuel College and the Board of Regents. And so we're going to take a brief look at the bang for the buck that the Lord is getting through us in our Board of Missions. At about 1/3 of the contributions that we give toward the CBP or CLC General Fund. Our CLC Board of Missions helps congregations get going on the path toward just starting out and then becoming self-supporting congregations. When I've been here now 12 years, and before that I was on the CLC Board of Missions, and at that time we had gone from perhaps 15 subsidized congregations down to 11 perhaps by the time I left, because there's a built-in sunset on being a mission congregation. You get a certain amount of subsidy per month because they can't afford to operate their own congregation and pay their pastor. Every January 1st, it becomes $100 less. And they gradually either become self-supporting or it becomes plain that they're not going to become self-supporting, and we try to help a congregation elsewhere. That's how it works. Over the years, that plan has been working, and certain congregations have become self-supporting. Others have finally decided that's not going to happen here. We'll have to be served with God's word some other way besides being a congregation with our own pastor. In fact, this table is a little bit outdated because as of this month, the congregation in Mapleton, North Dakota, has just gone self-supporting. They're a little bit west of Fargo, and they started when I was way back when I was still on the mission board, and they've gone through that process of gradually becoming more independent. Now they are, which is a wonderful thing, which can make you wonder, why don't we have new congregations coming on to this system so that we can start baby churches and have them grow? And the basic answer to that question is that typically people become mission congregations when they start this on their own. They'll start in their living room and ask a pastor to fly in and serve them. And then they rent a space, and then they want to call their own pastor, and they apply to become a mission congregation. We haven't had that happen. We've got quite a few places that are satellite churches, smaller groups served by a neighboring pastor. There just haven't been those that come and say, we'd like to take the jump and become a mission congregation and try to be self-supporting someday. It hasn't happened. The concept of calling a man to be a stateside missionary and just go make a cold call on a city and try to start a Christian congregation, we've done that too. Walt Schaller at one time was our exploratory stateside missionary. Wayne Eichstadt long ago was the exploratory stateside missionary. And because of budget constraints and lack of progress with actually starting congregations, that didn't pan out. So it's not as though we're opposed to growing our congregational presence in the United States. It's that the opportunity didn't seem to be there. And we've got really pressing, wonderful opportunities in our overseas missions. That's basically how things have been going. Oh, I don't mind telling you, this Appleton group with Pastor David Udy there, they've got a lot of young families, and they might be starting a Christian day school soon. So things are really happening there. That's a bright spot among our stateside missions. Yes, sir.
You can't have Christian day schools
Yes.
That's the change in the policy.
There is a change as of the last convention where the mission board used to be telling congregations, if you have small children and would like to start a school, we'd like you to see you able to support your own pastor before you take that step. The thinking being that we have small congregations that are self-supporting that might like to start a school themselves, and they're being asked to support other small congregations. Do you see what I'm saying? There was a philosophy that we'd like the church to be self-supporting before it takes that step of opening a Christian day school. And this past summer, they said, hey, this is a great mission outreach tool. We should just go full steam ahead, and if a congregation has a good plan to start a school, we should be supporting that as a mission effort. And that's likely to happen. I don't know about this next fall, but that's likely to happen at least in Appleton. I know, Detroit, yeah. Yeah. So we hope God will bless that effort. Our overseas mission program has just grown exponentially since the inception of the church body. See all these different flags and countries? This is a place where we have overseas presence, sometimes with direct subsidy to congregations, sometimes simply fellowship and mutual support other than monetary support. Our two full-time called missionaries are Pastor Peter Evenson, who used to live in South India because of the anti-Christian sentiment of the government there. His visa was not renewed. He moved to the West African country of Togo, helping to start an organized seminary there and do outreach there. The Lord knows what he's doing because the secondary language in Togo is French because they were a French colony way back when. Pastor Evenson happens to be fluent in French, so God's putting his talents to good use there. Our traveling foreign missionary is Todd Ullman. He spends about half the year here stateside doing guest speaking and various duties and some well-deserved vacation. 6 months out of the year, he's traveling by himself without his wife and family in various parts of the world where we can't have a full-time foreign missionary, but we need people to check in and see how they're doing. So he's got, I had that call before he received it. And I really admire the dedication of being willing to be on the road 6 months out of the year under those conditions. Because I've been in those conditions, and it's no picnic. So we thank God for his work, both of those men. Also, we have certain overseas church bodies and congregations that get regular visits from certain CLC pastors. For instance, Michael Gurath from Phoenix will visit a congregation and a school in Kenya. Pastor Hine from Grace Fridley will pay regular visits to Liberia. I believe Pastor Mayhew goes to Tanzania from time to time. Is that right? Yeah. So we've got part-time missionaries whose congregations help contribute their time in order to fill some of these gaps. A couple of conventions ago, the convention authorized the calling of a third full-time foreign missionary. There's an obvious, compelling need to have a third full-time foreign missionary. There were budgetary matters and COVID concerns that got in the way of them issuing that call. They're gearing back up to have the congregation reaffirm that they're able to start issuing that call and to do so. And it's needed. We need about 4 or 5 more full-time foreign missionaries. At the same time, we have a pastoral shortage. These are the kind of things convention wrestles with. Just a quick look at how our foreign mission efforts have grown from 1960 with Japan, then the NCLC Nigeria, 2 groups in India, in Congo and Central Africa, Western Africa, Ghana and Togo, in Eastern Africa, Tanzania and Kenya, also Uganda later. In Asia, aside from the Indian church bodies in Nepal and Myanmar, Pastor Olvera and his family have a congregation in Mexico and a satellite congregation. Did we show him? He's coming up. We got a picture of him too. So here are our foreign church affiliates on the Indian and Asian continent. The BELs, oh, and by the way, for our membership stateside in the CLC, about 7,000 souls. I have a hard time finding a really current estimate among our foreign churches being served with the help of our mission efforts. It's in the area of 80,000. So while we're a little disheartened at times about the size of our church body and its lack of growth, the kingdom of God is growing by leaps and bounds, and we're privileged to be a part of that. So I'm excited about it. That S seminary shows that in the CLCI, Pastor Benjamin has around 25 men at a time enrolled in the CLCI seminary, I believe. The BELC, they have a regular full-time seminary, and in Nepal, which has just started again, they've had COVID problems, of course. If you see a place and it doesn't have an S by it, that doesn't mean they don't train the young men to be pastors. It means they don't have men going full-time to classes. What they do is, in many places, they'll have young men travel from a distance for 2 or 3 days out of the month. It's sort of a seminar approach to try to give them as much of a biblical pastoral training as they could give under the circumstances. In Africa, these are the church bodies that have been listed. Nigeria for a long time, an active seminary there. I think they have 5 or 6 men enrolled. Tanzania has the Wartburg Seminary, which began a couple of years ago, then had to leave off and has since restarted. We have a full-time foreign missionary. We need somebody at the seminary there. And those congregations who can also be visiting the group in Kenya and Uganda and the contact in Zambia. That would be excellent. Although I'm not on the mission board, so I'm not deciding where a called missionary would serve. There's Pastor Olvera, who got in contact with us and has had visits by CLC men and is in fellowship with the CLC, and I believe has a young man in training for pastoral work, a main congregation and a satellite congregation in an area that's beset by poverty and crime and the drug cartels and so forth. It's an adventuresome place to live. You knew I had to get a picture of myself in here somewhere. This is 3 summers ago, and as part of the Mission Helper trip, my son and I accompanied that trip along with Pete Rhyme. There's Drew Nauman, my nephew, who's a pastor in Spokane now, and Pastor Ullman was also there, part of the Mission Helper trip, and we spent a couple of days in seminary instruction with the young men enrolled in the seminary there. That's Pastor Raju Bitrakati, whom you may know, who went to school here and graduated and went back home a couple of years ago. Some of the pastoral seminar meeting there in Kenya, and I'd like to make special mention of the CLC Mission Helper Program. Pastor Ullman gets a group together of mostly young people, sometimes some retired persons, and they go to either India or Nepal or East Africa on a rotating basis. This year it's to East Africa. It hasn't been done because of COVID restrictions, but they're back on the job this summer with, I think it's about 9 young people who are accompanying him to do child evangelism work in Tanzania, including Erica Oster and Henry Lau from our congregation who will be going on this trip. We have a Mission Helper Fund that people generously contribute to help defray the costs. It costs, if these young people going were to pay all the expenses, I believe it would be in about between $3,000 and $4,000 in order to go on this trip, depending on airfare and other factors. So we like to see them on their way. There's about a $2,000 balance in that Messiah Fund, and the council will meet and no doubt decide to divide what's available between these two as their needs require. So we'll be happy to help support them as they go on this trip, and the fund will be open for further contributions. I'm a big believer in this trip because I've been on one and I've been around people who have been on it, and when you are actually over there and see with the material things that people do without, but the joy that they have in the gospel and the eagerness to learn the Word of God, it's a life-changing experience, and it makes a difference for for our whole church body when our young people do that kind of work and have that kind of experience. Pastor T.
We have Mission Festival coming up in February, and the special offering envelope for that Mission Festival is supposed to be split up between Mission Helper Program and Mission Development Fund. So,
there's an opportunity right there with that special envelope coming up in February's Mission Festival. Kind of briefly, because we're running out of time, the Board of Education and Publications, only 1 penny out of every dollar? That's true. They have an $18,000 budget, and it used to be less than that. The reason being that here's what they do. They have some oversight over the publication and business dealings of the Lutheran Spokesman, our Journal of Theology, the Daily Rest Devotions, reprinting of publications such as the Citto edition of Martin Luther's Small Catechism, the online availability of our Sunday School series, God's Hand in Our Lives. They've got a lot to do with our CLC websites. Some of these things are somewhat self-sustaining through subscriptions, but they do a lot on a small budget. We have a member of the CLC Board of Education Publications right here among us. It's our teacher, Seth Schaller. What else do you do that I didn't think of? Okay. The Board of Trustees, they handle the money. We've got that large balance in the Church Extension Fund. We've got a retirement program, and that lump of money of all the called servants is accruing interest, and they manage that. They have, if the church body is paying a mortgage, they're the ones through whom the mortgage payment goes. Their budget is about $75,000 this year. About $25,000 of that is administrative. If you go to the front desk at Emmanuel, and the friendly people there are waiting on you in the book house, they're going to receive some salary for that. That comes from this portion. $50,000 for the quote-unquote old retirement plan. We can thank God that we have, for 40 years now, a new retirement plan where we front-load contributions to an IRA for our called workers. Because the original plan was, as a Senate, we're just going to pay people a stipend after they retire. And if we were doing that right now, that would be that dollar would be 95, would be old retirement plan. But through the foresight of our Board of Trustees, we are not in that situation. However, we do have some elderly people who are still part of that old plan, and as God calls them home to heaven, this amount will be gradually reduced. Okay, now here's the short story of what our voters will be looking at this coming Sunday evening as we prepare to say, how much as a congregation are we going to pledge to contribute toward our synod-wide efforts? The general fund from this last year, 1.2 million and change, it's basically flat. They're hardly asking for anything more. And there's a reason for that. Because we're running a $90,000 deficit right now, which can be covered by CLC reserve funds. If they do better in a given year for contributions, they contribute the excess to the reserve funds, and that helps us out in the lean years. We're going to have to be doing that this year to the tune of perhaps around $90,000. So they're trying to keep the anticipated budget flat and hope that congregational offerings will match that flat amount. Here's a mention, by the way, of other CLC funds besides CBP contributions. If you want to help out these funds, it takes a special contribution for improvements at Emmanuel College, the ILC Improvement Fund, the MDF Special Mission Projects, apart from their regular budgetary stuff. Church Extension Fund, don't give cash to the Church Extension Fund. They'll accept it, I think, but they have a large balance. Those funds are needed elsewhere. For instance, the Student Aid Fund, so that students can take out loans, and that gets repaid by student repayments, but also needs to be front-loaded. So those are separate funds. Here's a shout out. The Emmanuel Professorage Committee, there's a lot of maintenance and renovative work that needs to be done on that long row of teacher ridges there on Prof Row at Emmanuel. Those homes are all 50 years plus old. And there's always a long list of things that need to be done there, and it's done at a bargain rate because of volunteers, largely from this congregation, and also on-campus help. So if you want to know about how to get involved with donating time and skills as opposed to just funds, talk to Pastor Tiefel. Another way to look at the division, what's coming up for the budget proposal, ILC, $740,000 in Synod support, 18 for education and publications, $75K for trustees, $429 for missions. As I said, they're asking for basically a flat budget, but hoping for better performance from the congregations to support it than we had so far last year. How are we doing in our home budget? Amazingly well, by God's grace, moving generous hearts to push us over our home budget goal, which was $778, and at the close of the year, we had $811,000 contributed. There were a couple of large donations toward the end, for which we're thankful, but also the faithful support of our rank and file. Our last year's goal for supporting the church body missions, that is the CBP, was $200,000. We contributed $217,000. Again, a couple of large gifts toward the end of the year helped in that regard. We're also really impressed with God's grace working in the hearts of our members with regard to our building project, because we had hoped for $450,000 in contributions as a down payment. It's edging up towards $700,000 is what we were able to apply before getting a loan for the rest. So God's been really good to us. We've got big challenges coming up next year because of the increased debt service for our new building, largely, and some modest increase for our called workers. Our next year's budget, as set by the voters, is $848, a 9% increase. So we're going to need to turn our attention to supporting that figure for the work that we do. Where does that leave us for Synod support? Here's a look at what we've given, what we've pledged, and what we've given over a number of years. Last year, for instance, $200,000. We actually ended up with $217,000, and our church council is recommending a figure for the coming year of $210,000. Voters have the option of increasing that or decreasing that as they see fit. So that's a lot. What could we do here for $200,000 if we didn't give anything to our? We could do a lot. What kind of blessings do we get from the work that we do through our fellowship in the church body? In missions, in preparing young people for a life of service to the Lord, and oftentimes a life of service in the public ministry. Can't put a price tag on it, so I'm happy that this church has done its part in supporting our mutual work in our church body. Oh, one more verse, 2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Oh, he does, doesn't he? I think we all have a roof over our heads and food to eat and medical care and all those things that we need. We've been generous. We can afford to be with the Savior such as we have. If there are no questions or comments, we're a little over time, so let's close with a verse from that same hymn. 477. And for thy gospel let us dare to sacrifice all treasure. Teach us to bear thy blessed cross, to find in thee all pleasure. O grant us steadfastness in joy and distress, that we thee ne'er forsake. Let us by grace partake of endless joy and glory. Amen.